So, Jack, what does day one look like to you?
Well, I think the most important thing to understand, it's the closest thing to me, is our most valuable resources are our employees. And the message to them has to be consistent, it's got to be firm, and it has to be sent with a sense of urgency. And I may be wrong, but I don't think so. The current administrator, the one that's either left or about to leave in the next couple of days, she's been there 4 years. She has never visited the Chicago Field Division, the Los Angeles Field Division, the Houston Field Division, our three main offices. So just imagine you're sitting there busting your ass as a task force guy or an agent, and you don't even know what this lady looks like, nor has she even graced her presence upon you, which to me is unheard of. This is a team effort. We're not that big of an agency, and that's why I think it's so important for them to hear it from my lips. This is what we're going to do, and I'm going to do everything I can to make this happen. Here's how I look at this. Leadership's about relationships. It's about building coalitions. And my job as the leader of DEA, if I'm lucky enough, is simply this: to do whatever I got to do, to get whatever I have to get to make them successful. And doing it where they will never know not what I want. Because I think that's really important. And what I want, quite frankly, is to shift gears, to target the people that we need to be targeting, the organizations we need to be targeting. And that includes illegal aliens that are acting as proxies for the cartels, to go after them in conjunction and in complementary fashion with our ICE counterparts and the other agencies that are involved in that, because that to me is really important. In terms of what we're going to do as a specific agency, is we got to open our eyes to everything. Are we in the right place throughout the country? Are we fluid enough to meet the threat? Are our agents understanding that they may have to move, that they agreed to that as terms of their employment? That's a tough thing to sell and to bring back into focus if it hasn't been enforced in a long time. Unfortunately, we're going to do that. The selection of supervisors, it's going to be a little bit different trend this time. My team and myself will be involved in it much more than it has been in the past. There's some legal requirements we're going to have to deal with, but I want to know that the people that are on the front lines are leading from the front, that take care of their people and that understand what the president's vision is, what the Attorney General, Deputy Attorney General vision is from day one, so they understand where I'm coming
as well
from.
as yours, which is going to
right.
be the same. We've talked much about the foreign terrorist organizations, in prior podcasts, the domestic cartels. The one thing we haven't really discussed is the chemical flow attack. Joe, can you being in counter narco terrorism, you dealt with this a lot, didn't you?
Yeah, so we know from what we've done in the past, and back in 2017 when we were both in DC, we actually started looking into this because it just started to really explode with the methamphetamine and then the fentanyl and then some of the other precursor chemicals. So we know that there's about 7 or 8 countries that are working with China, and China sends these chemicals to those 7 or 8 countries, and then it goes to Mexico or labs in those countries or even on our southern border. And those chemicals are used to make fentanyl, methamphetamine, and some other stuff, some pills and some different things. Those all have to be traced back to the host nation, the host country, and then above the DEA with sanctions or designating some of those people as certain things. That has to be known, but we have to attack that as 1, 2, 3, not just willy-nilly, let diversion figure it out. It has to be part of the primary mission, and then give it to the people above. And that's another thing. Jack's familiar with Congress. He's familiar with how Washington, D.C. works. He can put forth those numbers and statistics, and we can work that backwards. I think the approach is brilliant. And I think that if there's any chance to put a dent in all of it, it's fantastic. And then I also believe that we have a mandate. There is a mandate here of what direction we need to go in. And it's not political. Jack showed that picture of Notre Dame Stadium. 100,000 individuals. I think it's about 110,000. That stadium dies every year, and it's killed by fentanyl and these precursor chemicals. Can you imagine if a foreign country murdered 110,000 of our citizens? We've been at war constantly. So I think all of that is going to come into play.
So many of the, just to put it in layman terms, is that many of the chemicals used that are killing Americans are not coming from the cartels, but they're coming from other places also.
Absolutely. China, probably Asia in general, but China is probably the number one source for the critical precursors used to make fentanyl. And those are being shipped primarily by front companies. The Chinese do make an effort to try to cloak and dagger this, but they're going directly into Mexico in ton quantities directly to the cartels. And I think that first of all, I don't think a lot of people understand that. And I know our relations with China are somewhat stretched now, but this is a common bond we have between us because they also have a drug problem in China that doesn't get a lot of publicity, as does Mexico. So there's some common bond there. I think one of the things that Joe tripped on that's so important is one of the things that I learned the hard way my first go around is the importance of keeping key members of Congress abreast of what you're doing.
Correct.
And one of the things that I would do day one is make sure we make a list of the crucial senators and congressmen, and then I go and explain my plan to them and keep them updated as we progress. Because that's crucial to funding. Because for us to be able to do what we want to do, it's going to cost some money. And I know the Trump administration knows that, and they're willing to do it. It's just a matter of fact, we've got to get the policymakers to understand what we're up against. I mean, nobody at that level for years considered the Mexican cartels anything but thugs and killers, which they are in grand proportion, but they're also pretty astute businessmen.
Correct.
And the way that they developed the business model for fentanyl, for heroin, for all the opioids, as well as cocaine and methamphetamine, is really something you could teach at Harvard. It is well researched, and they move with the movement of the addiction in America. And I think a lot of our congressmen don't think that way.
And we use the word fluid a lot. They're you have to be fluid because they're fluid. When you cut off one thing, they're going to go another way. When you try to stifle something, they're going to try to find another way to get it in there. So being fluid is very important.
You know, Tommy, the best way to explain that is the use of the cartels of street gangs.
Right.
That allowed them, and I used to say this, is street gangs, in many cases, are their Amway salesmen, if you will. They go door to door, but they're not selling laundry detergent. They're selling heroin and poison. But that has allowed the cartels to be much more fluid, much more out of touch with the direct transactions, and to a certain amount really left them out of the whole process. We've got to look at that. And the way that we do that is we attack communications, we attack organizations, and we begin to put those together. And that's what the domestic cartel program was all based on. And I'm very proud to say that the reason we came up with that plan was because I had relationships with police chiefs across the country. And they kept telling us, you got to come to us with this. We can make a difference on this. We want to be involved. We understand how they hurt our communities. It was just a time that the people that I was reporting to didn't want to take a chance. They felt that for us to try to broadcast the domestic cartel program would frighten liberal policymakers, community leaders as another,
Everybody's got to go to jail.
Everyone's going to jail. And
Right.
that would be, in fact, we would be far more selective in spending our enforcement dollars if that program existed and really went to where I believe it can go.
And it can make a difference.
It can make a difference
And
every
absolutely.
day.
And it can make a difference in those deaths that you're talking about. And I think that's what Americans want to stop the most is the needless deaths of the heroin overdose and this fentanyl, and then, and as many of the listeners will know, the marijuana, it's not a big deal, now that they have dispensaries, but marijuana is coming in by the boatload.
Yes.
That is illegal. It's coming across the border, and that money's going back to these agencies. And if there's one pitch I can make, is just buy your marijuana legally, right?
Absolutely. I mean,
China's no longer, they're in the business as well. I mean, they're
Right.
China's shipping all kinds of waxes and different high THC material to the United States, and they're being sold out the back door in all these facilities in California and some other really, really, really liberal states. And they're making millions.
Yes.
And then China's involved in the money laundering on the back end, and they've learned how to do this with the precursor trade.
Right.
So it's good.
If you look at some of the cases we've seen in rural national parks just recently, and I would point out, obviously, Washington State, Northern California, even some parts of Arizona, where there are Chinese nationals that are brought into this country illegally,
Right.
cross the border in Mexico, are sent to a facility where they grow and harvest marijuana on our land, unbeknownst to the local law enforcement. So if you see that type of involvement from a foreign entity who wants to kick our ass and overthrow us, you're beginning to see the bits and pieces of how they can do it. And we've got to be more aware of that too. And that does start with controlling the precursors. It does start with cracking down on importation, on companies that may be suspect. And more importantly, many of these precursors, especially in the large quantities, they're transshipped to other friendly countries. We got to go after those countries too, because that's really a way to evade us. I would also throw out, I think, our military being the best, and I saw what they could do in the Caribbean corridor. We've got to engage a little bit more with them in terms of being able to stop on the high seas and find out what's coming over.